Okay, great. Let's get started. What I'd like to do is just begin by having the panelists introduce themselves, and I'd like them to just say one thing about them that people in general may not know. Ash, why don't we begin with you?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Ash Devada. I'm the VP of Products at a company called Duo Security. We focus on securing access to VPNs, any application, cloud app, you name it. And we're known as the most loved company in security because customers love our stuff because it just works. That's my plug. And something that people don't know about me, I survived a major breach and went in 2011 with my then employer, a breach sponsored by China. You probably know who that is. Yep.
Hi, good morning. I'm Chris Carlson. I'm the VP of Product Management at Qualys. If you know Qualys, we're a provider of security and compliance solutions delivered from the cloud for on-premise, endpoint, and cloud-based solutions. So company plug, stop by our booth for our Qualys red bags. But on a personal note, when I turned 40, I said, I'm hitting my midlife crisis. Instead of a sports car, I bought a drum set. After a couple years, I think I still do air drumming better than the actual real thing, but that's it.
Hi, I'm Jeff Hudson, the CEO of Venafi. We're in the least understood part of security. So there are two actors on a network, people and machines. People identify themselves using usernames and passwords, and machines don't use those. They use keys and certificates. IAM is a $7 billion market. The protection of machine identities is just getting started. We invented the technology that protects machine identities, which is incredibly important. What most don't know about me is I was kidnapped once and I escaped.
How can I follow that? Jeez. Good morning, everybody. My name is Chris Ng. I'm VP of Security Research at Veracode. Veracode does software security in the cloud, so SaaS, DAST, RASP, everything you can think about in terms of application security, we basically do. Something that people don't know about you is pretty easy when people actually don't know you, but I'll say, I'm an electrical engineer by trade, and I was very happily being an electrical engineer until one day a friend pulled me into his lab and taught me how to write an exploit for a buffer overflow. And from that point on, I was hooked. Security from then on.
Great. I'm Mike Goldgoff. I'm VP of Marketing for Whitehead Security. We're a leader in application security. And I was at the RSA conference first in 2003, so this is the 15th year. So it's been really a lot of fun to see how the industry have moved forward.
Something we don't know about you.
That's what that
Okay,
said.
all right. Okay, so let's begin with just getting a baseline here of, and I'm going to start with you, Ash. So what do we mean by IoT? Let's get a baseline definition for that.
It's one of the FUD words, right? IoT, and there are a lot of scare tactics in terms of, you can actually hack into a device that's implanted inside a human, like a penicillin issuing device, and hack into it and so on and so forth. But one good way to think about IoT is any device that is capable of sending or receiving data to a network. Those can be sensors, your lifestyle home-based sensors like toasters, your Nest thermostat, the watch you're wearing, Fitbit, you name it. And on the industrial side, these can be telemetry sensors inside an engine, your automobile. GE has been investing a lot in IoT on the industrial side. These can be government sensors in parking meters, in garbage trucks, and so on. But a good way to look at it is this thing capable of sending or receiving data? If the answer is yes, then you can think of it as an IoT.
Any other additions or?
So I don't think it's just things, i.e. molecules. I think it can be virtual things. So it could be virtual machines. It can be kind of anything that has intelligence that can connect to a network that is non-human is, in my mind, a thing. And they can range from the fastest, largest mobile device from like a Boeing 787 to a light bulb.
I think IoT is just the new buzzword for something that's already been happening for decades, right? We make things and we plug them into networks. It's the Internet of Things running software, is the way I like to think about it, right? I saw a tweet the other day, which I thought I'd share, and that was that the S in IoT stands for security. I wish I could remember who it was. I would attribute, but enjoyed that.
Yeah, that's right. I think the thing about buzzwords is it certainly gives awareness From the security side, if your non-security management comes in and says, oh, I read about the Jeep Cherokee getting hacked, how does that impact us, right? And I think that's where the asset inventory discovery is very important, because you may not have any interactions with those type of IoT devices, but you may not view that a virtual machine that is taking connections in from third parties is an IoT stream, right? And for those people doing industrial IoT, it was called a different name 10 years ago. It was called M2M. So you may go to the industrial side and they're like, what is this IoT thing? So buzzwords give awareness for us, security, but it also makes the conversation limited if we don't have the same language around what IoT is.
You know, I like to think of it as a continuum. So you've got a server with a server operating system, you've got a PC, and you've got your mobile device, and you've got IoT. And it's really, it's gradual. So there's no such thing as, oh, these are IoTs and this is everything else. I really think of it as a continuum.
Good. You know, as we talked about this panel, what we wondered, and I'd like to see this by a show of hands, how many of you actually have a budget for IoT security? By a show of hands. Wow. Okay.
Like
Small market.
A very, very small number of you.
0.02%.
Yeah.
Well, do you have a budget for protecting it that's called something else? Because there is no budget for IoT yet? You call it something else? AppSec security, infrastructure? Okay. So still new altogether.
One. Okay, good. So Chris and Mike, I think I would like to ask you, when you think about securing IoT at the application layer, there's always that push and pull between security versus convenience. And could you talk a little bit about that, and maybe if there's differentiating that between enterprise, really IoT, and consumer?
Yeah, I mean, the convenience versus security thing is like the age-old question, right? And it exacerbates anytime you're putting anything in the hands of a consumer, because things just have to work, right? For most of us, especially now, I find that the older I get, the more that I just want to plug something in and not worry about it. I don't want to go recompile my Linux kernel anymore. I don't want to do these things. And so even for those of us that are technical, things just have to work. I do think that the security convenience trade-off is something that we can get past. I do think that we'll eventually be successful with it once we get product manufacturers to follow some core principles that we've known about in terms of secure design for a long time. So think about the Mirai botnet, for example, right? Took down a lot of sites through DDoS, basically a huge botnet that was built through hacking DVRs and webcams. And how was that done? It was done through brute forcing passwords, right? So these devices had about 50 or 60 different default passwords that were common across them, and just by identifying the devices on the internet, you could scan for them, attack them, install malware on them, and eventually build up this botnet. This wasn't rocket science, right? We've known for decades that you don't put default passwords on things, or that you force people to change the password when they first install it. But yet that was the attack vector that led to the majority of those devices being compromised. So I think one core tenet that we have to look for, start moving towards, is secure defaults, right? It's very simple, secure defaults. Don't give people a way to put something on the internet that's going to be insecure. If you're going to have a default password on there, force them to change it when they first log on. And I think the other core tenet, as I think about it, is auto-updating. So a lot of the devices out there now that have been out there for years have no way of updating. So if we find a heartbleed or we come across some vulnerability, there's just no way for those devices to even be patched. And some of them can be patched, but they don't get patched on their own. So it's up to me, or my parents, or whoever has this thing installed in their home, to know that there's an update available, and then log into the internal console interface of the device, download the firmware update. Like, let's stop there, because none of them are doing that, right? Things have to auto-update, so they have to be updatable and they have to auto-update. So those are two really simple things that I think are going to help us move in that direction, where we are going to be able to provide convenience and security at the same time. Now, enterprise versus consumer, I haven't thought about that too much. I would say that, I guess in enterprise you have more visibility. There's generally a higher level of visibility and awareness as to what's on your network, although some may disagree with me on that. But still, you're having some of the same challenges, right? For example, patching. If something comes out that needs to be patched, well, your organization may have a quarterly patch cycle. And so, in the meantime, you're exposed, right? You're vulnerable. So I do think we have a little bit more discipline in the enterprise, but we're going to face the same problems that we do in the consumer space. And I think moving towards security faults, auto update, and probably some other core tenets could help us move the enterprise along as well.
Great.
Sorry to
Thanks, Greg.
monopolize that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Well, I think we'll hear a lot about digital transformation at this conference, but the reason I'm saying this is, convenience versus security, a consumer versus enterprise. Things are changing, right? So you've got bimodal IT operating now in enterprises. You've got consumerization happening. So that's driving? I think convenience is a requirement. So you can't argue about convenience. Convenience has to be there, and then security as a result. And then security needs to be there as well. So both of these things have to happen. How they will happen? I mean, we'll watch and we'll see what the dynamics are. As far as enterprise and consumer. Again, I think the lines have blurred, and it's all about risk, I believe. I mean, what is the application? What is it about? Because, I mean, you've got the consumer application called an insulin pump, right? And you've got somebody's life and death or a pacemaker, consumer application. But, I mean, so it's all the level of risk that we've got to prioritize our application security programs to.
I'd love to add something. So, a good way to look at it is ease of use. It's very easy to say. The company I work for, Duo, for example, Duo pretty much is, the name is two things, and we focus on security and keeping things easy and simple. And it takes very strong discipline and patience to get things right. All of your security practitioners, one thing to think about is how are you making it easy for the end user to use security? It's not about top-down. For example, in our company, we have a 1-to-4 ratio of designer to engineer. And these are designers who are traditionally on the consumer side to keep things attractive, simple, smooth workflows. And that's one of the reasons a lot of our customers give us random hugs when we walk into the trade show. They're like, hey, something that took me 4 weeks to deploy, now I can do it in an hour. But the one thing as security practitioners you should probably be thinking about is how do you keep things easy for the end user? End user is not your enemy. They're actually your best buddy, and how do you make it easy for them to use security?
Mm-hmm. So one perspective, as I listen to everybody talking, it's all about the human and attributes that the human sees. And I will contend that what we really better think about is the machines and what the machines see and how the machines interact with one another. How many people here use Ansible, Chef, Puppet, HashiCorp, SaltStack? Raise your hand. Come on, everybody uses that. Raise your hand. Everybody does. These things, these are machines that build machines. And there are machines that attack machines. And we think about human factors and human interaction. We better start thinking about the machines too, because everybody knows the number of machines, virtual or otherwise, is going to be 300 billion on the internet. In short order, the number of people will be about 6 billion ad infinitum.
I would challenge that a little bit on a panel, right? Focus on human interaction a little bit more than you do normally today. Take the most popular breach in the last few months, DNC hack. It was not an attack on the infrastructure or the security tools. It's a simple phishing email sent to one of the most influential people in the whole organization. So attackers are humans. They want to do it in the simplest way possible. If not, they'll walk to the next one. And humans are the weakest link because you have a million machines, and of that, there's a human behind the machines, right? So try to focus on what is the missing link.
Well, that's right. And as you talk about humans as the missing link, it's really an interface to the application behind it, right? And when we talk about IoT, I wanted to make sure that we understand there are different types of IoTs. A lot of the questions here kind of focus on consumer. It's easy for us to think about consumers. The convenience is also for the enterprise. I have this industrial controller. I need to monitor it remotely. Let me plug it into the internet, or something that can be routable to the internet. There's no user interface or user convenience to the operator of it, but the administrator of it, right? And I think that's where we'll start to see a lot more enterprise impacting, right? So yes, if the IoT botnet hit Dying DNS, affected my website, I'm indirectly affected. But if someone comes in the old war dialing days and Shodan and kind of comes in through the back door from all of my enterprise IoT devices, that's a different story. So that's where, at Qualys, we're really talking about what is your IT global asset inventory. If you don't know that those 5 devices are on the network and where they can be plugged in, and then if they are vulnerable or they're not compliant, can't change default passwords maybe because they don't give you a password command to change it, but if you can see that it's there and it's open and you can log in with that default password, then you got to do something different, right? So once again, consumer IoT gets a huge visibility because we're all consumers. In fact, I was talking to Lynn before, and she's doing a lot of things with voice privacy. Is Alexa recording you? We had some heated debates out in the back. I don't own one, but while people are worrying about voice privacy on consumer IoT, the bad guys are just walking in the back door through the enterprise IoT or the application that it connects to, or things that are known and not known on the network. So.
That's actually a great segue, because I think that we're looking at security practitioners here, and there's this influx, a new influx of BYOD coming into your organizations, and the management of those devices, even knowing that they're there. Ash, you want to begin talking a little bit about the management and how to?
Sure. Yeah. We recently ran a survey, or not a survey, an analysis of 10 million devices we see every day. We're a cloud-based company, so we get to see the data. And the shocking fact is that 2/3 of those 10 million devices we analyzed are unmanaged devices. And I think the previous speaker talked about your employee is logging in from Starbucks into Salesforce.com. You have no visibility into that unless you are using one of the more sophisticated new age tools. And it needs a major shift in thinking. You cannot force the end user to install an agent on the device. They're going to ask you 100 questions. So from vendors, I think we have a responsibility to say, hey, how do you think security in a different way, where you don't need to install agents, you don't need to install proxies, which kind of defeat the purpose of whole cloud infrastructure. How do you make it easy to actually get visibility into that? And in the last 2 years, something major happened. The OS vendors of these BYOD woke up and are adding really powerful APIs. Apple has one of the best APIs. Android N has really awesome APIs. They're called Safety Net, if you haven't heard of it. You can use these APIs without installing any agents on the device to understand more about the device. And on the vendor side, we take pride in terms of leveraging these APIs. But with BYOD, one of the basic things you want to do is, what are all the devices out there? Who owns them? What's the security posture of these devices? And you don't need to install agents on them. So think about, do I have the visibility, and how do I get better visibility? And then you can think about what kind of security policy I should have for those devices.
So what are you going to tell someone that is struggling today to manage all of these devices? How's that practitioner going to deal with a mounting challenge that seems like it's just increasing?
Try our product.
Now, so the struggle is we're creating more and more silos, right? If we talk about IoT, then it's like, oh, here's another silo of IoT, just like another silo of cloud applications. And we all work for vendors that try to do things horizontally across those silos. But I think what's really happening, and when we talk to CISOs, the common question is, I keep buying more security products. My risk posture doesn't go down. I'm hiring more people to manage those security products. I don't have people that have IoT security experience. And from AppSec, how do you find AppSec experience? So how can we do and really say that an IoT device isn't any unusual than an end user computing device or a cloud instance that comes up and down? It's really just a common view of what it is, what it's doing, what its posture is, and how you can secure it. And I think that's the only way that, as vendors, we'll let our enterprise customers get that leverage, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Jeff?
So the laws of physics around these things we call devices or machines or applications are completely different than the laws of physics around humans. The amount of time between a keystroke on a keyboard to a computer feels like 20 or 30,000 years. And the number of devices, the speed at which they work, means this has to be automated. And it still amazes me that people say, well, I'm going to put this stuff on a spreadsheet, or we're going to build this little database. And you have to start by saying, if we can't automate it, we can't secure it. It has to be automated. And we got to get out of the mindset of thinking that these are human interactions, these are machine to machines, and we got to have machines that are taking care of all those things. So I think the first thing is automate it. Anything you can do, you better automate it.
Mike?
I think, you got to think risk, right? We can't secure everything, and a lot of times these IoT devices end up exploiting the same vulnerabilities that have been around on the server side as well. You've heard these statistics, 40% of all data breaches due to application layer vulnerabilities, and yet people are not investing in application security. And the IoT situation is just making that worse. And so I think we got to think risk. What are the applications? What's at risk? And how the IoT devices play into that.
Let's talk a little bit about the regulated space. And I know there's a lot of different perspectives. There's regulated data that's being pushed from IoT devices and stored in the cloud, as well as, well, let's begin with that. Do you want to begin, Jeff?
Sure. So if you look at any one of the regulations, and by the way, a lot of our customers are in financial services and healthcare. If you look at any of the regulations, they always start with who has access to what data. So it means identity. It starts with identity. And all the regulations and most of the statutes and the underlying premises are built around which people have access to it, not which applications, which machines, which devices have access to it. And so I think we're going to see that shift because there's a growing awareness of the things that touch the data. And those things have to be identified, vetted, secured. You got to be able to attest that something didn't touch the data, much less a person touched the data. So that's sort of where it's going. Now, having said that, where we are today, most of the regulation and about data and where it's stored and the different jurisdictions it can be stored in is really important for everybody in a regulated industry to understand. Because by accident, you can get crossways with regulations by putting data in the wrong country by accident. And so it's a big mess right now, and it's getting messier because a lot of the treaties that we've established are starting to wobble a little, given the current world political situation. And so it almost takes an expert to understand what's happening, and it's changing in real time.
Yeah, I think that's right, that the regulations shouldn't impact what common sense and best practices is in terms of data security and data management and AppSec and vulnerability management. It just puts the burden on top of the security teams to meet the requirements of the regulations. So when you have all these auditors come in and you're doing internal findings 6 times a year and the security team is preparing for the internal findings and then the external finding, who's watching the henhouse, right? So if you can actually take security technology and consolidate usage so it meets the multiple levels of a security program, this goes off to our auditors, but we also know that the device is secure. Right? We also know that there are things running. We also know that we are patching our vulnerabilities or we're blocking application layer exploits through a web app firewall or something. So at least the regulators and the auditors can meet that, but the enterprise is not doing the security to meet just the regulations.
One simple practice I learned in my career is ask the vendors the tough question. What data are you gathering? And you as a security practitioner want to think about how can you minimize that amount of data you're gathering? Because the moment you gather the data, you're liable, you're the custodian. I'll tell you a small story. We were working with a major identity proofing provider. End of the day, they need to prove that if you are John, you're really John. And all we wanted was a yes or no answer from them after we say, hey, John ABC is required for identity proofing. And the vendor came back. It's a very large vendor. They came back with an XML scheme where they're going to ask us to consume 2,000 data points that include SSN, health record data, all the past information. And they're not willing to change their schema. All we wanted is yes or no answer, and they want us to own SSN numbers of every customer we have. And that's the thinking you want to have, as in how can I minimize the amount of data I'm gathering so that it becomes much easier for you to comply with all these regulations.
That's that's the design principle from way back, right? Sort of least privilege. Don't give me something that I don't need to have. Don't store something that I don't need to have. I think the other aspect of the whole cloud, where's the data going, how's it being secured, is the availability aspect. And you're seeing that crop up a lot more recently. Like, not only where are these providers storing my stuff, but how well are they storing it? Where is it going? Am I going to be able to get it back if something happens? You read, the GitLab story that happened, over the weekend, or right? Somebody, let's see, an email went to some automated system, and it got misinterpreted as you're reporting somebody that shouldn't have access, so their account got disabled, and then one thing after another, that was sort of the root cause, and then eventually a database got deleted, and everybody lost all their commits. And then they tried 5 different five different restore things, that none of which worked the way that they thought it would have worked, even though they thought they had redundancy, they didn't. And eventually they got some of the stuff back, but there's this window of time where they didn't. And that's just one cloud provider, right, essentially. And a lot of companies could be using that sort of thing for important code bases, important information. Now, expand that across the waterfront of all the different providers that we use to store our data. So it's not just about, you can ask those questions, right? Ash said, ask how they're protecting it, what they're protecting it with, how long they're maintaining it. All vendors have that information. Also ask about, the redundancy and the availability, and what's going to happen if something happens to my data, because that can be just as destructive.
Yeah.
Well, you hear about policy, and then you hear about practice. So everybody's got a policy. How many people actually conform to the policy?
Right. Did you
And
test your restores?
Exactly. It's a big mess right now.
Yeah, and I think the original question was about compliance, and I think there's a major shift going on from compliance-based security to risk-based security, because it doesn't work. I mean, you can be compliant and you're still vulnerable. And now we've got, all this organized crime. I mean, they know compliance regulations, right? They're going after the money, they're going after records, and we've got to think risk and risk-based approaches, and think like a hacker.
I'd like to, thank you. I'd like to switch here a little bit and talk about how enterprises are going to deal with subpoenas, handing over data to governments. So what are your thoughts on that in terms of the challenges and we've already seen?
Sure. The subpoenas aren't the problem. It's the blind subpoenas that are the problem. Anybody know what a blind subpoena is? Okay. You put your data into an ISP, a cloud provider, service provider, and if a actual field agent in the FBI gets a judge to give a subpoena, that data can be accessed, and it's blind, and that the person that has the data that gave it to law enforcement is prohibited for telling you they gave that law enforcement your data. Okay? So you don't know, there is no Fourth Amendment, there is no eminent domain, there's no search order, there's no search warrant, there's no subpoena that you see. It's called a blind subpoena. And most general counsels don't really understand this, but when you start to explain it to them, it gets interesting, because all of a sudden then government starts to be viewed more as potentially an adversary. Not because of intent, but because of what they can do. So essentially, they can get somebody to cough up your data, which is in some ways a breach, right?
I think you're going to start to see more of a proliferation of warrant canaries, right? Which everyone's familiar with that. So the idea is, going back to this term, you put up a thing on your webpage that says, as long as this page is here, we haven't been asked to divulge any information through a warrant. And so you're not actually, when it does happen, you take down the page, and then people know that something happened, but you're not actually explicitly saying what. You're seeing that more and more in sort of activist style organizations, but I do think that may become more of a prominent way of communicating that information going forward. The other thing I do think that we'll see more and more of is just, again, if I don't have the data, I can't give it up, right? And so you're going to see more of
Or
a
it's encrypted.
right?
It's encrypted.
Well, right. Well, if I have no way to encrypt it, I have it, but I can't actually get at it. And you're just going to see the end-to-end messaging, for example, like Facebook did, and Facebook and WhatsApp and like iMessage. Some of these things that are end-to-end encrypted that, as far as we know, there's no way for the the company in between to actually get those.
Oh, all they have to do is
Right.
get the keys. I mean, that's simple.
I mean, if you got your two endpoints. So I think you're going to see more products shifting to that direction where, if I'm in the middle and if I'm compelled to release information, I can just say, here's this encrypted blob that I have at it. I can't decrypt it for you.
I think there's a major shift going on in the industry, right? For the first time ever, there's a public debate between FBI and Apple about the iPhone. And you should think about it actively as, and if you get a subpoena, how would you react? Are you just going to oblige and give the data, whatever your lawyer says? Or are you actually actively going to think and question it? And I encourage you as practitioners to think about it, ask the right questions. And you're not alone if you are kind of on two sides, right? These conferences and security, Cloud Security Alliance, these are great forums to ask other people, how are you dealing with it? Because I don't think there is a rule book to follow. The rule books are written in 1990. And today, the amount of data is probably 1000x, right? So, and hats off to Apple to publicly come out and fight that case. And they kind of put a path for us to all follow.
Yeah, I guess the question for the room is, those big providers, Amazon, Apple, that stand up to some of the subpoena actions, does that give you confidence or a choice that you're going to select that vendor or that provider, hoping that they would shield you, though there was no obligation or contractual? That's something that maybe people are, hey, you know what, they're not going to take the voice record from the Amazon voice recorder, though it doesn't record right, Lynn. So then I'll start build apps on it because I know that they're shielding me. Well, that may change tomorrow or day after, right? So at some point, the shared responsibility model goes so far. You have to take control of your own assets, your own security posture, and leverage the vendors and players where they may or may not fit and how they may shift. Also.
Just out of curiosity, how many of you have Amazon Alexa or Google Voice at home? But a few hands.
What's your IP address? And we're all open here. We're asking you questions.
Others should definitely try it. It's a cool product. I don't work for Amazon, but I love the product. Yeah.
Well, there are prosecutors, and frankly, there are cases that are being adjudicated in front of judges that will not understand your technology. So how are you going to protect your company and your customers' data in light of that? I mean, the Alexa case is an example of a buffer subpoenaing a buffer that should be gone.
Should be. We can talk about that very much.
Feature.
Yeah. So, what type of advice do you give here in terms of storing this kind of data, things that the people should really take away?
I'll start. Take a broader approach, not just about data, but in general, right? I think Mike was talking about don't start an IoT security project next week when you go to your office. Please don't do that. Think about risk modeling. If you don't know what risk modeling or threat modeling is, Google for it, go to SANS, the nice tutorials, but what are the top 5 things you really need to solve in your organization? And we on the vendor side see that it's most of the times the basics. Do you have basic multi-factor authentication? Do you have your devices all patched? Do you at least know what your network span is? And once you have the basics right, and a good way to look at it is have some early wins so that your management is pleased. Don't start a 1-year-long project. Start a 4-week project and show some early wins to your management. So if there's one thing I want to tell you, it's that, right? Start with some early wins, gain the trust, and get the basics right first.
Yeah, I think the early wins is key. I'm doing a talk tomorrow on DevSecOps, the new term of bringing security into DevOps. And part of the approach for these speaking presentations is, what's the apply slide? What can you apply to the audience? What can you do next week? What can you do in 3 months, right? And I think that really comes down to data doesn't live in a vacuum. Water finds the easiest path. And if you have IoT devices or Windows XP servers out there and workstations, you don't know where they are, that's your weakest link. As an example, we're doing 8 million scans every 4 hours for a large customer just to find new devices and port changes. You can't secure what you don't see. You can't have it put into your risk model if you don't know where it is or the posture. So it really starts to programs, wins, and also visibility, right?
So my ask for everybody is to think about the world as having 2 equal actors, people and machines, applications, devices. And we spend a lot of time identifying who is on the network. And we also got to start spending that much time understanding what is on the network and understanding the identity of those things and what privileges we give those things. It's a dual world. People aren't in charge nearly as much as we used to be. There are these machines. So understand the identities and protect the identities, because it's first principle. We talk about risk, but let me just lay out first principle. And I'll ask you, can you have security if you don't have identity? Well, if you can identify and secure and protect the identity of people, but you can't have you don't secure and protect the identity of machines, do you have security? Think about that. Because as you move it into the cloud and you put IoT out there, that becomes critical. No security without identity of machines.
I like a lot of what's been said already. I think, we talked about how do you make steady progress towards something. We're not going to solve this overnight. One thing I've talked about in a recent presentation is just, we have this sort of squirrel syndrome, right? Where something interesting happens and we all want to, we all want to go work on that thing because it's really interesting, and and it may not be the most risky thing for us, right? We're not all being attacked by nation states. Right? Some of you might be, but by and large, most of you are not. And to suddenly swing all your attention over to the latest, SSL interception exploit that's a targeted thing and requires computational power, when you could be over here patching your devices. One of those has a bigger payoff than the other, given your risk profile. And I think you want to ask yourself the question, how good am I at the basic blocking and tackling of security? It's like the boring stuff, but it's also the stuff that is going to be the most important. How long does it take me to patch all my devices? Do I know about all my devices, right? We have similar data points where when we go and try and scan our customers' IP or domain space and try and find web applications, we usually find 30% more than they even knew existed. And so now you take devices on top of that, it gets even worse. So how long does it take me to understand what I have out there and patch it? How quickly can I respond if I need to patch it? Those sort of basic things, we can all get better at, and it's going to serve us better than, looking at the interesting hack of the day and scrambling to patch that.
Yeah, just building off of it, think applications, think APIs. The applications are running your businesses, and we have all sorts of data that there are vulnerabilities present in most of those applications. We're finding 4 or 5 vulnerabilities on average in an application. And so people keep saying cybersecurity, they interchangeably use cybersecurity and network security. And there's a big problem outside of that, which is the applications. You may have secured all of your devices. You may have secured all of your networks, but the hackers can get through the application layer, and we've got to start dealing with that issue. It's really serious, and when you get to that issue, it's blocking and tackling. There are vulnerabilities that are out there, have been open for a long time. We've got to start prioritizing with risk, prioritizing which ones to fix, and going all the way back in the software development process to make sure that all those vulnerabilities don't get introduced to begin with.
That's great. All right. So thank you very much. I appreciate the time and sharing your thoughts and ideas.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.